Well, welcome to our May huddle. We are excited to have everybody here. I always like to go through things pretty quick. We should definitely be done by 7, possibly before that. So this is just a look at what we're going to do tonight. We're going to talk about what we've been doing lately, what's up with those state legislative maps, with the congressional map. A bunch of people sent me difficult questions, and we're going to talk about the difficult questions that you sent, and we will talk about actions that you can take and share some useful links. So what have we been up to lately? A number of you joined us for our wonderful rally for fair maps and fair elections. As I said before, if only the excellence of our rallies was shown in the results of what the redistricting commission did, then we would all have fair maps by now. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much to those who attended. And then a lot of us also went to the kind of people's hearing inside the State House afterwards. And that was a wonderful event as well. And we have been collecting statements from everybody about why they support fair maps. We made this awesome banner, and a group of you held it up in the hearing room. That was an exciting moment. I was not there. We were on the watch party, and we didn't see this happening, but I hear it was quite the event. We are making ourselves heard and seen in the hearings. Now, a summary of what is going on with redistricting. Time is in fact melting at this point. So we are waiting for a Supreme Court ruling on the General Assembly maps again. We are waiting to see what happens with the redistricting commission being held in contempt or not. They have to all give their statements by tomorrow morning. We are in the middle of a process of the congressional map, and don't worry, this is just a summary. We're going to go over in more detail in a few minutes, or in a minute. So we're waiting. We're in the middle of the lawsuit process for the congressional map. And of course, there is a May 28th deadline in the federal case relating to the General Assembly maps. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine, who's going to give us some specifics on all of this.
Well, I suspect that many of us are pretty familiar with this. We're in this weird kind of Groundhog Day where, the Ohio Districting Commission passes a set of state legislative maps, an Ohio House map and an Ohio Senate map. It's not actually proportional, or it's not representationally fair. In other words, it's super gerrymandered. And so the Ohio Supreme Court sends them back to work. Now you'll notice here that the third set of maps is highlighted. And the reason the third set of maps is highlighted is that was the point that the Ohio Supreme Court said, okay, enough is enough. We're going to give you really, we're going to encourage really strict transparency, and you need to hire independent map maker. They hired 2 map makers, bipartisan map makers, to craft maps. And many of us watched, the map making happening. You could watch their screens, and it was just incredibly transparent and kind of the way I had envisioned things working. But that's the point in that 4th set of maps where essentially they did a bait and switch. And as opposed to using the work that the map makers were doing, instead what happened is that they ended up essentially just saying, oh, you know what, there just isn't enough time. And since there's not enough time, we're just going to tweak the 3rd map. Now, of course, because it was not actually a new map, and the map makers had been told, hey, you can't actually draw district, you can't draw a new map based on the old map. You have to start all over again. They got sent back to work. And with the 5th set of maps, it feels even worse than this, bait and switch, because what happened is the 4th set of maps was nearly identical to the 3rd set of maps, but the 5th set of maps is the 3rd set of maps. And if you move to like the next slide, here you can actually see the maps. And I just wanted to highlight that Tiffany's going to be throwing in chat, kind of a redistricting timeline. So if you wanted to look at the lawsuits in some more detail, there also will be a follow-up, so you can actually, you know, if you want to take a deep dive and look at all of these things, you really can. But as you look at the third set, now the fifth set, what's really sad about this is that they're not proportional. And in the Ohio Constitution, we put really strict criteria. You know, we said, okay, maybe it's not enough just to say you shouldn't gerrymander or draw district lines to favor or disfavor one political party. Let's put criteria. And so we called it representational fairness in 2014 with the state legislature. But you know, representational fairness is that idea of you look at 10 years and you come up with a metric to see how Ohioans voted over a 10-year period. And the district line should, in fact, you know, as close as possible. And there's a reason that the language was shall attempt. It may not be exactly possible to get to 54% Republican and 46% Democratic, but that should be the goal. That should be the goal. That should be the metric for identifying fair maps. And that is very clearly what the Ohio Supreme Court said. And the way, you know, that they got around this is they created a bunch of very close toss-up seats that they then identified as, Democratic. And so that's just, you know, if you can imagine a red year, or in this case, a year that is a more traditional year, it's very likely that we could have super majorities again. And so just incredibly sad to think that we would not have the kind of accountability that we should. So if you go to the next slide, I really hit on this before about kind of the idea that they were supposed to draw a new map. The day after, you know, the League of Women Voters filed, you know, a suit saying, hey, this is unfair. I also wanted to highlight, you know, just the sheer injustice of using maps that have already been struck down and using a strategy just basically to run out the clock. And I think we're all feeling that like, cheaters should not be able to play games and get away with it over and over again. And so it's just, you know, it's just been incredibly painful. I noticed the brazen defiance of the law. It's like, these folks expect us to follow the law, and this is what they do. So, you know, clearly contemptuous of voters. The Chief Justice has asked for the commissioners to explain why they should not be held in contempt. And so, you know, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but what we do know is that there's a federal panel that set a deadline of May 28th for the new General Assembly maps. And they basically said, hey, you know, if the Ohio Redistricting Commission can't figure this out, what we're going to do is the third set of maps, which, you know, in other words, you don't do it right, we're going to give you cake. I did pull out the quote because to this day, it just makes me crazy. So these are the two Trump appointees. This is Beaton and Thaper. We are acutely aware of the third map's flaws, yet the deference to the state in mind, we see this as the best of our bad options. And there's something so horrible about worrying so much about the mechanics of an election and not about making sure that it's meaningful and accountable. And so there is some lack of clarity about how long the maps will be around. When the Ohio Redistricting Commission majority passed the map, and so the two Democrats voted against it, and then Auditor Faber did as well. But there's some lack of clarity because they said they wanted to have it around for 2 years. There's nothing in the Ohio Constitution that lets them do that. But there you have it. Not a lot of clarity. My apologies. If you'll move to the next slide. All right, I did want to highlight this. Sorry, everybody, I get all revved up and I can't talk anymore. So one of the things that was interesting is that behind the scenes, Bride Rose Sweeney and some other folks were just really frustrated by the process. So they actually started creating a house plan. And, this is actually kind of interesting. One of the things that we really wanted was people not to draw their own districts, but you get a sense of how frustrating it is for us, but it also has to be frustrating for the people that are going to be in these districts. And I just thought, it's worth considering this. What were the kinds of things that these folks were thinking about? We've looked at, the Fair District maps, and we've looked at the Ohio Citizens Redistricting Commission's maps. I just thought this was interesting. Trevor Martin put together a doc that we'll share in the chat that kind of explains the differences between the third map and this map. And it's just interesting, for those of us who love looking at maps and thinking about how these things, we're all frustrated, including the people who are, going to be directly impacted by these districts and the primary. And so kind of the next slide. So what's going on with congressional? We're going to kind of switch gears here. I think the thing that is really challenging is that there are two different lawsuits. There's the League of Women Voters of Ohio's lawsuit, and ACLU Ohio is representing them. And this lawsuit essentially says that there are two districts that clearly violate the Ohio Constitution by being so terribly gerrymandered. And they're very clear that they need to fix the 1st and the 15th congressional district. And they said, let's do this so that we can have new maps for the 2024 election. The Elias group, and so if you think about this one, looks at it really differently. They actually ask for a complete redraw, and they actually want to be able to use new maps for this cycle. Now, we all remember that when it was the primary, we voted on maps that were not clearly constitutional, and we're still waiting. So I think the congressional is really painful in that we're waiting on what's going to happen with these lawsuits. And so, Mia, if you'll kind of go to the next one, I thought it was worth kind of looking at these districts. So it's the 15th and the 1st that the League of Women Voters have identified in their lawsuit as the ones that are clearly a real problem. Now, I don't know about the rest of you. I can look at a ton of areas in this and say, ooh, this is a problem. So if what you do is you look at the first one, this is one that clearly almost solidly could have been in Hamilton County, creating a clearly Democratic district, and would actually have, is a violation of splits. Like it's a significant problem. And then if you look at the 15th, you have an interesting thing here. I live in Dublin, Northwest Corner, and this is one of Columbus, I should say, the Columbus Franklin County area. If you look at that, it works its way, that's yellow, it works its way all the way over to Shelby County. And so clearly that is a problematic district. And so, once again, this is not the map that Ohio voters deserve. It's not the maps that we worked for. And as Kathleen says, 15th looks like a gun. And on that note, I've kind of gone over pretty quickly, but I think a lot of us are aware of just how painful it is and what's going on with the lawsuits. And we will do what we can to kind of keep you up to date. But I think the challenge is kind of keeping ourselves connected and committed and keep going. It's just incredibly hard. And with that, Mia, if you're ready to go on.
Sure. Anyone have any specific questions for Catherine about any of those lawsuits? I am about to go over a bunch of questions that people emailed to me, but definitely feel free to drop questions in the chat and we can talk about them later. One thing to mention about the League of Women Voters suit, of course, if you make changes to districts 1 and 15, there is a domino effect that it would affect some of the other districts, of course, as well. Okay, so this next section, folks sent in questions, and some of them are really hard questions, and I will do my best to answer them. And I'm going to ask Catherine and others to, jump in with some answers. And some of the answers may be, we don't know, just telling you, up front that may well be the case. So the contempt ruling, I know a lot of people are very concerned about the contempt rule. Will it happen? Are we pushing it? Certainly, we support a contempt ruling, and we very much hope that the people who have been behaving contemptuously and have contempt for the law are held in contempt. The fact that the commissioners not only drew bad maps, but they literally submitted, when they submitted the fourth set, it was almost the same as the third set. And the court was like, you can't do this. It's almost the same as the third set. And then when it came to number 5, they literally just handed in number 3 again. And that just seems so brazen, that it's kind of extraordinary, that, and I think people are really feeling like, if the court doesn't hold them in contempt, it's kind of saying, well, okay, fine, go ahead, break the law, disobey our rules. We don't really care. So we really, really, really do hope that they hold them in contempt. And Susan and Mosey are having conversation here. I know I spoke to Susan earlier, and she had some interesting observations about what Maureen O'Connor, Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, had done. So she's used the exact same action that she did in February, which made people threaten to impeach her. And she's used the same language again. And perhaps, we don't know, but perhaps that's a sign that she's saying, don't mess with me. I'm not scared of you. I'm not scared of you threatening to impeach me. I really, really mean it this time. We will have to wait and see. Hopefully that comes soon. Another question was, how far could the Ohio Supreme Court go with an order to the Redistricting Commission to adopt independent map drawers maps with technical corrections? Well, each time they've had a ruling, they've gotten a little bit more specific. They can't actually say, well, we're going to draw the map, or you have to use this map, but they can get kind of more and more specific about what they ask for. We hope they do, because we do feel that the independent map drawers map was superior. And again, I'm going to ask Catherine or Suzanne or Lisa or whoever wants to jump in here if you have any comments.
So
Catherine?
it's interesting because in the federal lawsuit, the federal panel essentially said, oh, if you all don't sort this out, we are going to, you all are going to use that third set of maps. Well, that essentially is picking a map. So you understand what I'm saying? That whole idea that, oh, it's in the Ohio Constitution that the map makers are the map makers, the Supreme Court tells them what the problem is, and the map makers figure it out. I think that's, one of the things that we know is that whole notion of, okay, that's what's in the Ohio Constitution. Well, the courts could hit a point where they just say, hey, this is the map, or this is the person we're going to appoint, or something specific. It's just that it's clearly in the Ohio Constitution that the map makers are the Ohio Redistricting Commission, and the Supreme Court is supposed to, identify unconstitutional behavior. So that's how we've been in this merry-go-round.
Yep. But we hope they get, more and more specific, and they kind of help us out there. Okay. So I'm
loving these questions.
Yes, no, I'm having some little private messages here that, okay, so if the Ohio Supreme Court doesn't get more aggressive and specific, does that mean the game is up? Well, certainly if they if we get to the end of May and the federal court says, okay, we haven't resolved this, we're using map 3, then, at least at that point that's that. And that leads to the next question, which is, would there be any legal action that we could take against the federal court for imposing a map that was ruled unconstitutional by the Ohio Supreme Court? And I guess the problem with that is, if you're saying, well, let's take it up to the Supreme Court, if y'all take a look at the Supreme Court and think about the Supreme Court, is that really somewhere we want to go right now to try to strengthen democracy? Maybe not.
Well, and Suzanne, is there something you wanted to add here? This is Suzanne Almeida from Common Cause.
Sure. So Mia's entirely right? The accountability measure for the 3-judge panel is an appeal to the United States Supreme Court. And we have seen a Supreme Court that is not super friendly to democracy issues, including imposing good maps or waiting to impose a map, right? Like, this is very similar in some ways to, say, the Alabama case, where they were like, look, you're going to have to use a bad map for a cycle because we don't have time because your elections are coming up, right? Which is not how any of us hoped that would go. It's not what we want here. But I think that that's part of the calculation here. I do think there's kind of, one of the things that I've been really watching from kind of a national perspective is this interplay between the federal court and the state Supreme Court. There's a doctrine called abstention, which essentially says federal courts are supposed to stay out of the way of state Supreme Courts if they are moving forward in a process, in an active process. So it's interesting to kind of see the decisions that this 3-judge panel has made vis-a-vis the state Supreme Court, which is in fact still moving forward, right? They're making decisions relatively quickly. They're increasing, like Mia said, the specificity of their decisions. They're not kind of in this argumentative tone. They're in a like, no, you need to do the work that you are set out to and required to do by the Constitution tone, which is very different. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how this tension plays out, not just in the redistricting world, but I'm watching for it in voting rights worlds as well, because I think it's not going to be the first or only time that we see this.
Yeah, thank you. And the next question is kind of basically the same question. It's a what happens next if we get those third maps, and is that the end of it? We don't know if, somebody else will file something, but we just know that we're certainly going to be very wary of trying to get the Supreme Court to weigh in on something which may have some impact bigger than Ohio. This question,
that's legal strategy. Like, one of the things that happens to me right now is I play quarterback thinking about what it is that the lawyers should do. My background is social work. I'm not a party to the case, and I really should just, listen. I guess what I'm saying is, I am very interested in some of the kind of decisions that folks are making, and so many answers are I don't know. So right. I think that part is really frustrating.
Yeah.
And as Mark says, is it possible Republicans are hoping that we go to the U.S. Supreme Court? Probably.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yes.
Mia, can I add just one thing? So
yeah.
The May 28th deadline only applies to the decision to hold a primary election under map 3, right? So the ongoing challenges in the state Supreme Court are going to keep going unless the parties decide to not keep going with them, right? The ongoing challenges in the federal court, depending on kind of how that order is written, and I need to take a closer look, that may also keep going. So it doesn't automatically end a case. It may make a decision as to which map is being used this year, but litigation is just kind of an ongoing process until the cases themselves are wrapped up. So the federal court deadline on May 28th, May 28th won't have any impact on the state Supreme Court.
Okay, I just wanted to go, and I know there's a lot of questions in the chat, and we will try to go through them all. And I appreciate that you are all asking, and you all have interesting and excellent commentary. Just somebody asked a kind of clarifying question. How is it that we voted on a congressional map that's still under review and may be found unconstitutional, but we already voted using, we didn't vote, we voted using the congressional map, but we had to push back a primary because we didn't have a state legislative map. Well, the reason we didn't have the state legislative map is because it was struck down and they hadn't approved another map yet. We were kind of in the middle. And so there's no map. So they have to push the primary back until we get a map. But what happened with the congressional map is there was a congressional map was struck down. Another one was drawn. It was passed by the redistricting commission. And then they had to start a new lawsuit. So they were kind of at the beginning of the lawsuit. And so that map was actually like the map. And the lawsuit was just kind of beginning. So we had to go ahead and vote using that map. But of course, it is still under review and it may yet be found unconstitutional. So what will happen if it is found unconstitutional? That is a very good question, which I'm going to say that we don't really know the answer to. It may be that they say, well, it's unconstitutional, but we'll fix it for 2024. It's not completely impossible that they would say, oh, we have to have another primary, although that sounds really, really, really unlikely. But we genuinely don't know what would happen. The question, what is going to happen in the end? We don't know. I mean, really, that is the answer. This is, these things are unfolding. It's a lot of legal strategy. It's a lot of uncharted territory for kind of everybody concerned. We will see. Certainly, we do know that maps that are passed without bipartisan agreement are not 10-year maps. They're 4-year maps. And in fact, with this latest round of General Assembly maps, the commission was talking about it being a 2-year map, although as Catherine said, they don't have the ability to do that. Judith, I have a Judith who is drawing on the thing. If you can not do that, that would be great. But certainly in 4 years, no matter what, in 4 years, I mean, unless by some miracle we get 10-year maps, certainly in 4 years, in 2025, we're going to start this process over again with drawing maps. Now I'm going to go to the next set of questions, and then we will have a little moment to answer some of the stuff in the chat as well. I get a lot of these questions. I know Catherine gets these as well. People want to know, we had a better thing when we were collecting signatures. Why did we stop collecting signatures? I'm going to go forward in the slides and then backwards in the slides for a moment. This is one reason we stopped collecting signatures. So we first started working on redistricting reform so many years ago. And there have been many different reforms that have been attempted, independent commissions, different things, and that have failed because it is very, very difficult in Ohio to pass ballot measures. This is a list of ballot measures just since 1996, and the ones that have passed and the ones that have failed. So out of 44 ballot measures in the past 60 years, only 10 have passed. And those 10 that have passed are ones that have had bipartisan support. In Ohio, it's easier to get people to vote no than to vote yes. So if you have a lot of money, if one side puts a lot of money to convince people to vote no, it's very, very difficult to have a measure pass. So where we were with the signature collecting, and I understand how frustrating this is, and I'm right there with you with it being frustrating, but we have to remember that we had tried with a truly independent commission and it had failed. We had tried with, different things over the years and they had failed. And so we collected signatures in order to get the legislature's attention and to come to a negotiated settlement that had a chance of actually passing. Because again, when they tried to do something without bipartisan support, it failed. repeatedly it failed, and it has a history of failing. And so the reason that they did that negotiated settlement and they tried to make the language as specific as possible to be against gerrymandering was so that we could actually pass the measure. And we did pass the measure. And, it's very easy to see in hindsight that, oh gosh, we should have put this in it, or we should have put that in it. Well, there was a lot of hard bargaining, and we put in kind of everything that we were able to. If we did it again, yes, we would try to, put in more things that were specifically stopping, the bad things that we have seen happen. But we also didn't have a way of knowing that the whole political temperature in the country would change so much and so quickly in a fairly short period of time, such that we're now living in this era of shame and fact-free world where people are willing to get up there and just, lie and break the Constitution. It really is different. It's different. And so, that's something that we didn't know. But was it worth it? Well, think about this. Think about all the time that we've spent in court. Think about the insistence that the Ohio Supreme Court has had on actually following the law and ending gerrymandering. If we didn't have those amendments that we put in there, they would have drawn their first map and we would have been done. That would have been the end of that. And so, even though this is a really difficult struggle and we may not come out the way that we hoped we would come out, we are in better shape than we would have been if we didn't have those redistricting rules in our Constitution at all. Will we go back to the ballot as possible? How can we fix this? And can we go back to the ballot? Of course, we are interested in fixing these flaws. Of course, we're interested in winning truly independent redistricting for Ohio, to amend our Constitution. But we have to keep that chart in mind that shows how difficult it is. And so the last thing that we want is to have everybody collect signatures and get all those hundreds of thousands of signatures and from every county in Ohio and do all of that work and then have a really, really well-funded campaign against us that means that it loses at the ballot. So we have to be really careful and really smart. And that is not by any means saying that we aren't going to do that and wouldn't be a part of something that if and when it happens, but we want to be prepared and we want to do our research and we want to think it through and we want to make sure that, as many people as possible are on board. That is, my take on that. And I'd be happy for others to pitch in. And, that is by no means saying there isn't frustration and there isn't hindsight and regret and whatever, but we didn't make those choices just out of trusting Matt Huffman. No, we made those choices out of understanding the history and having been through and fought a bunch of battles and lost them and wanting something rather than nothing. And that's where we are. Catherine.
So I guess, one of the things I thought that might be interesting, I kind of was going through the chat and I thought it was possible that it would be worth kind of highlighting some different things.
Yeah.
Susan Haas, I wondered if you might want to come off, because one of the things that you were saying kind of, there was something that you said that struck me as really interesting. And it was this, Chief Justice O'Connor took the exact same action she did in February that triggered all the impeachment talk. That says to me she's not playing. And Susan, do you want to pitch in? Because there were a couple different times you answered questions about disciplinary action and stuff that was in there. And I thought maybe you'd like to just say a few words.
Well, the language of her show cause order, first of all, it was signed by her alone, sua sponte, on her own motion. There apparently was no vote on the court, and that was exactly what happened in February, where Kennedy filed her little letter and Fisher filed his ridiculous dissent from a show cause order, which doesn't actually do anything but order people to show cause. And that was the order that got the Republicans seriously bandying around impeachment. And the fact to me that she went ahead and did the exact same thing again, did not go to the court, did not have, the 3 Democratic justices co-sign that order, which would have been easy enough to do. That just says to me that she is asserting her authority and she's not going to let them bully her.
And then there was a question about law licenses, which I was kind of interested in. Susan, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Not much, because I haven't really been looking at it. I know Andrea Yagoda has been looking at it a little bit more, but certainly, brazen defiance of a court order has to violate a lawyer's oath. It just does. And anybody can file a complaint with the disciplinary council, asking them to investigate a lawyer's misconduct. I just posted a link to the rules of professional conduct, which Sue Dean pointed out is a lot of pages, but it's not that hard to get to the relevant sections just by looking at the titles. I don't know them off of my top of my head, but just browsing through, it's not that hard to find, a couple, 3, 4, 5 relevant rules. Write a letter to the disciplinary council and say, we want, Huffman, Cup, LaRose, DeWine, Faber. LaRose isn't a lawyer. Yeah, so Huffman, Cup, DeWine, and Faber, we want them to, at least be disciplined, which could range from a public reprimand to suspension all the way to disbarment.
And then there was something else that you said that was in the chat that I thought, hey, that's super interesting. And it had to do with the number of signatures that we have to collect. For all of you, the number of signatures that you have to collect for a citizen initiative is based on a percentage of the gubernatorial vote. And obviously we don't want to depress that vote, but it is interesting to think about, this is the year that we set the number, for how many signatures we will need to collect. And I thought that was an interesting comment. I encourage people to go in the chat and kind of look there. So here's one, I'm going to throw this to you, Susan. There we go. To you, Suzanne. I'm sorry, tripping over my own tongue. So Connie was asking, what are the worst penalties for contempt? Like what can they do to them?
So they can be creative. Typically contempt penalties are things like fines, jail time, requiring people to, take certain actions, right? So think like probation or parole type things. It's not the exact same thing. The court, though, has some leeway here. I think that given the fact that these are official folks acting in an official capacity, there's some ability to be creative, right? There was some thought that maybe the court could order them to just stay in a room and do their homework, ground them until they get the work done. I think that would be within the court's powers. I don't know if the court has the appetite for that. But yeah, I think, typically it's fines and or jail time. I don't think that's likely what we'll see. I think it would be something more along the lines of a public reprimand, something more along the lines of you need to go back and do your work, that kind of thing, which again, doesn't have a ton of teeth unless you care about democratic institutions, in which case being held in contempt by a court is pretty serious. And I know that one of the frustrations that folks are expressing, I've seen it in the chat, is, there's no teeth here, right? The court can't make them do anything. That's how our courts are designed to act, right? Courts are only as powerful as we let them be. They derive their power directly from the people. Like that's the way that works. And so part of the challenge here is we have folks in charge who are defying those orders, and just kind of thumbing their noses at democratic institutions, which is a challenging place to be, right? So I think there's a lot of imagination and rethinking and creativity that activists are bringing to bear on the situation. So, shout out to you all for thinking through how can we actually make the punishment or the contempt or make it just so darn unpleasant for the commission to continue not doing what they're supposed to do, that, you know, it makes a difference.
It,
I like bills, 10 tons of trash. We're into it.
It's funny. I don't want an orange jumpsuit for DeWine. I want one of those ones with the stripes on them with like a little hat. Anyway,
Like
meanwhile, back at the
oh brother,
ranch.
wear out thou jumpsuits. That's where you're looking.
yeah.
So this is from Michael. He said, if the federal court can pick a map, why can't the Ohio Supreme Court pick one?
Sure.
You want to do
Sorry.
it, Mia?
No, go ahead. I'm just going to mute someone here.
The Ohio Supreme Court is governed by the Ohio Constitution. The federal court is governed by the US Constitution. So the Ohio Constitution specifically outlines the duties of the Ohio Supreme Court, including limiting them specifically from choosing or imposing a map. Those limitations don't apply to the federal court.
All right. Now, as much as we all care about contempt, and I'm sure there are other questions, probably time to move on. I did want to highlight at the end of the day, we just want fair maps.
Absolutely.
And with that, Mia, I'm handing it back to you.
Okay, very good. So actually, I'm going to hand it to Suzanne because Suzanne is going to answer the last difficult question that we had, which is Ohio the only state where the new rules in the Constitution are being twisted and ignored? Suzanne.
So the short answer is no. I'm going to give you 3 examples: Florida, New York, and Virginia, all of which have had some sort of reform, all of which have had some sort of struggles past the reform. I'm going to move through these really quickly, but you all should know you are not alone. Even in states that we have held up as, say, a gold standard or maybe a silver standard, like Michigan, their reform was not perfect this year, right? There's extensive litigation, some of which is probably valid. They had some problems hiring folks. They had instances where the public comment was cut really short. So reforms come with growing pains. It is not just Ohio. Can you go to the next slide, please, Mia? So Florida, the Fair Districts Amendments passed in 2010. These were constitutional amendments passed by ballot initiative that included rules on how maps could be drawn, so a lot of criteria, a prohibition on partisan gerrymandering, a prohibition on the diminishment of minority representation. So you can't take away, say, a Black opportunity district in theory. But after that first cycle, right, during that first cycle, they were passed in 2010. The next cycle would have happened in 2011. That intense litigation, similar to what you're seeing in Ohio, really kicked off, right? So it was 5 years of litigation over 2 maps, the Senate map and the congressional map. Both maps were initially sent back. Then there was a new map imposed, and there was more litigation over that. And so I think, you know, that was just last cycle, right? So there were growing pains getting just the definition of what these fair districts amendments meant and how we could use them. And that's similar to, say, Ohio, right? Where you're getting definitions from your state Supreme Court about what the representational fairness standard means, what some of the other standards mean. This cycle, I'm going to say it's been slightly better and also slightly worse. There was the state legislative maps were okay, not great, but it was clear that the state legislative leaders did not want to get sued on their state legislative maps, and so drew maps that mostly complied with the Fair Districts Amendments. The congressional maps are on an entirely different level. The first map that was passed by the legislature, Governor DeSantis vetoed, specifically because he was concerned about overrepresenting the Black community in particularly Congressional District 5 and Congressional District 10. That was litigated, or is currently being litigated in 2 separate lawsuits. In the state court lawsuit, and I saw someone mention this in the chat, they are suing to uphold the Fair Districts Amendments. And just today, this morning, or I guess mid-afternoon, they had a hearing on a preliminary injunction to stop a certain district from going into effect for this year's elections. The judge granted that injunction, is, I think, imposing a new map, supported by the plaintiffs. It will be appealed. That is not a fight that is over. And then there's also congressional litigation that Common Cause is involved in, along with Fair Districts Now, NAACP of Florida, which is arguing that the congressional map is an intentional racial discriminatory map for Black voters. And so I think that, not easy. The fight is still ongoing. And this is a state that, quite frankly, the Supreme Court of the United States pointed at as having its act together in the Rucho decision. So there's more work to be done there. Can you see the next slide? So in New York, which is a blue state, so it's not just red states. In New York, they passed a constitutional amendment in 2014. They set up a bipartisan commission, equally split between Democrats and Republicans. There was requirements for supermajority legislative approval. This is the first cycle that it was tested, and it failed. Just entirely failed. They deadlocked on a map. They were not able to, the process in New York is that they get kind of two bites of the apple. If they deadlock, they can go back and try again. They did that. The second time, they didn't even produce a map for the legislature. So the state legislature drew a map, both House, Senate, and congressional, over the course of something like 5 days. And Jeff Weiss is in the chat. He knows much more about this than me. The maps were not egregious, but they were certainly not good. And they did not do good things for particularly communities of color. And so litigation is ongoing, right? It's a reform. It's being litigated to determine kind of what are the parameters of that reform, whether or not the fact that the process was not filed or was not followed means that whatever map was produced is invalid. So a lot of the same questions are being asked in New York as were asked in Florida and as were asked in Ohio. One more slide. And in Virginia, this one I would say is the closest to success, but it's still a very qualified success. So they passed a constitutional amendment setting up a bipartisan citizen and legislator commission in 2020. That means there were 8 citizens, 8 legislators, 8 Democrats, 8 Republicans, and it was a mixed result. The commission deadlocked, right? They were not able to produce a map for House, Senate, or congressional, which meant that the maps were drawn by special masters, which is part of the process, right? It was written into that constitutional amendment that was what happened if the commission deadlocked. And the maps that came out were okay, but we're still seeing kind of those growing pains that we've been talking about, where, it was envisioned to work beautifully on paper. We saw the reality of partisanship, particularly partisanship of the elected officials on the commission. And now there's some conversation about what happens next. How do we fix it? How do we make it stronger? Same thing in New York, same thing in Florida. And with that, I think that's it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We appreciate that. I mean, I'm not sure it's much comfort to know that we're living through hell and other people are also living through hell, but I guess it's better not to be the only ones that are going through this, and to understand that, there are growing pains associated with this. Yeah, it's difficult.
And I do think, as we think about well, what do we do next? I'm not in the next month or whatever, but if we think about, what are the big ideas, and you can start thinking oh, we could completely do this differently. I think it's really important for us to kind of look at other states and think about what worked and what didn't work. And also an understanding that you can do reforms, and some are just more successful than others. And, and we want to come up with the best way forward for Ohioans.
And we may talk about that a little bit at the next huddle, different reforms. Okay, so we're closing in on the hour, so I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, who's going to talk about actions that you guys can do.
Hi, thanks, Mia. Hi, this is Lisa. So I'm with the League of Women Voters, and today we're just, after we've gone through this whole process of today, we're still thinking we can take action. So in addition to some of the things we've already been doing, which is writing letters to the editor. So we can continue doing that. We've got a pretty comprehensive list, and people have been doing a really great job. We can also help you write those. And we do have an election coming up. So we will need to register people to vote. And I know there's been some discussion in the chat about turnout, but no matter what, people are going to need help this November, September to figure out when the primary is and how they're going to vote 3 times this year. So that's what's going to happen. And then we can also work on the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition election protection team. So if you want to volunteer to help that effort as well, you can do that. So we're shifting gears. What can we do? We are really frustrated talking about, and one of those things we now can look at and see is really who we're working with in our elected officials. They're not working for us. They're not doing what we need them to do. They're not listening to us. So what we're feeling is that asking your local candidate right now and throughout this election is ask them, go to the event, email them, call them out publicly. So you'll be able to really see how they're feeling about them, and then supporting those efforts for the candidates that do protect democracy. Then I know there's some other ideas going on. And I believe I might be cutting out people chatting. So I'm going to let anyone else weigh in if they have ideas on what to do.
Well, I just want to say to Mary that I will send info about election protection in a follow-up. Was there someone else who wanted to jump in and say what you are, any other activities that you're doing or that you're recommending? I'm going to go to the next slide. And if you do have ideas or things you want to share or things you think are a good idea, please go ahead and put them in the chat, and we can also unmute you later. But Lisa, let's give it a try without your video and see if you can do this slide.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. So what we can do right now as well, actually tonight, is we can, I know many of you have signed this. So we have a sign-on statement linked here, which we'll put in the follow-up notes. And if you haven't signed and submitted a photo, please do so. You just submit a short statement, and this is what we're doing. You can see these graphics here on the side. We've been turning them into what you see here. And so short phrases are really helpful. And if you haven't submitted a photo, that's really helpful. It really increases the impact of it. So essentially, what you can do tonight is we have some of these already created. So what we want to do is really get the word out, use social media to our advantage to put pressure on legislators and those on the redistricting commission that we have about 3,000 people that have signed on to this statement. And, people really need to know that. And that's what we can do to feel uplifted and like we are doing something, we are promoting something. So we're going to drop those images in the chat. And what you can do is just share those images, so download them and post them on social media. And you could say something simple like, Ohioans really do support fair maps. And then this is an example of that. So Mia, did you have anything? I don't know if I articulated that appropriately. Do you have anything to add?
No, I think that sounds great. I'm going to work on getting the JPEG into the chat, which I'm not 100% sure. If you're able to download one of those images or two of those images and pop them in the chat, that would be awesome. And we will certainly in our follow-up send a link to a folder which has a bunch of these. But, you know, if you're good with graphic design and Canva and Google Docs and Twitter, and you want to join a team that's working on creating these kinds of graphics, that would be really great. We would really love that. We just have these.
Oh,
sorry, go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead.
So yeah, we have so many of these images that it's been difficult to get them all out. We really want to share the message for as many people as we can. So that's why we're asking if anybody could help create more of these images, which we've already got a template for. So if you do have that kind of technical experience, let us know either in the chat or via email, and we'll follow up with that as well.
Awesome. And last two slides, Lisa.
I will do the honors. It sounds like Lisa's internet's been having some problems. You know, I just wanted to highlight kind of the April 5th webinar with Dave Daly and Rory Riley Topping. They're just really wonderful. We're going to be sending you a follow-up. So anybody who's like, oh my gosh, I didn't get all the links. This is all coming to you. Because I know I, for one, spend a lot of time kind of looking at the maps, and I'm really interested in that. And also Mia did an update, which includes, you know, basically, you know, because it feels like there are changes every week. This is this week's update that will come to you as a follow-up as well. And then I just wanted to go to the next slide and say thank you so much to everybody. Our next slide is June 8th. And so this is the second Wednesday at 6 p.m. And, you know, we always love to hear from you. And so what you'll see is, you know, send us an email. You'll get your follow-up very soon. And I just wanted to say thank you all for participating. And I know we did not answer everybody's questions. And in fact, there are lots of questions that we have ourselves. So that also presents a challenge. But if there was something that you wanted to say, or, you know, please send me an email. Tiffany, if you're willing to pop my email into the chat again, that would be great. I love that Jeff Wise said, keep on fighting. And I'm so glad to be with you all so that we can keep on fighting together. Mia,
Thanks,
any
guys.
final words?
No final words, except
Suzanne,
have a good
any final
evening.
words? Suzanne,
Nope, y'all are
any final
brilliant. Keep
words?
working.
Keep working. Trevor, any final words? All right. Well, thank you all. I think we did very nicely in exactly an hour.
Yep. We'll send a follow-up. Thanks, guys.
Thank
See you later.
all.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Tommy. Bye. Thank you.